Hi, my name is Geoff Jones, and I am Slicefixer off of the internet. And I was asked today, invited today by Ralph to talk a little golf swing with you guys. So what I'm going to attempt to do is give you a brief understanding of how I learned whatever it is that I know, give you a little understanding of what it is that we do here and what I try to do with each of my students, and hopefully enlighten you maybe on a couple of things you may not have known prior to watching this footage. At any rate, as far as my deal goes, I was a pretty good player. I developed into a pretty good player when I was about 17 or 18 years old, and I had been heavily influenced by Miller Barber and Bill Rogers, primarily Bill Rogers, because Miller was quite a bit older than me. He was one of my father's best friends. And but I was exposed to the tour at a very young age, and started playing. My dad put a club in my hand when I was 18 months old. So basically, a golf club's been in my hand for 47 years now. And I was mentored by Bill Rogers, and Bill was a huge influence on me. And he was one of the best players in the world at my formative years, from about 14, 15 on to my early 20s. Bill was one of the best in the world. As a matter of fact, in 1981, he was the best player in the world. So, I was very, very fortunate that I grew up around players of that caliber. And in our little area, we had a lot of outstanding players. Bill's brother Rick was a really good player and was very influential on me. There was numerous others, but primarily Bill Rogers would be my mentor, I guess, growing up. I worked really hard. I was very dedicated and worked very hard and was willing to sacrifice way beyond what my friends were willing to do for whatever their passions were. And I got where I was pretty good, kind of a big fish in a little pond, and was playing awfully well in Arkansas and North Texas. But it wasn't even so much winning tournaments as it was the scores I was shooting. I kind of got on a little roll just playing unbelievably well, shooting some unbelievable scores. I shot 17 under our city amateur, and if you count the qualifying, I shot 22 under, I think. So, and I did that quite often. I was really on a roll, and it lasted for about 2 years or thereabouts, 3 years. And honestly, I had no idea what I was doing. I just found a feeling and just kept doing it and got really good at it. And the things that I can remember distinctly was my ball flight changed to a little more penetrating flight, and I absolutely could not hit it left. I don't care how hard I swung, I just couldn't hit it left. And I never missed the center of the face, and I'm not kidding you. I never missed the center of the face. Now, that doesn't mean that I always hit it solid. I might hit it on the bottom groove, but I wasn't hitting it out on the toe and in the heel, and I never hit the ball fat. If I did anything, I'd catch it a groove or two low on the face and pick it a little bit. But honestly, I had no idea what I was doing other than I could swing as hard as I could, and the ball continually went pretty much where I aimed it, and it was relatively solid. And if you can do that, then you're at a huge advantage over most golfers. And if you just have a reasonable short game and some guts and course management skills, there's no reason why you can't be a really, really good player. And so I was on the verge of being really, really good. And for those of you that have read that encyclopedia document, I have to thank Tim Connor for writing. I didn't do that. I wrote the post that it's comprised from, but Tim Connor wrote that thing. And thank you, Tim, if you happen to hear this. But at any rate, I got to the University of Houston, had a chance to be a pretty good player, and two things stopped me from becoming the player that maybe I could have been. One was immaturity. And that's one of the things I deal with kids on a consistent basis is, you have to have your act together. And I was fairly sheltered, and when it came to girls, I was so wrapped up in golf and just didn't pay that much attention to girls. And then, got a girlfriend or two, and, golf, I was running home all the time. My teammates used to laugh because I was commuting from Houston to Texarkana and back because I had a girlfriend that was senior in high school. Well, that was not a very mature thing to do. And two, I played with couples, and I played with a lot of guys that were really good down there. I mean, Blaine McAllister was a great player. Ray Barr and Terry Snodgrass were very, very fine players. And John Horn, very fine player. And then a bunch of the guys that I started with, Stevie Russell and Mike Neese, Mark Fuller were all really good players. There was a whole bunch of them. And then my sophomore year, I guess, John Slaughter and Carlos Espinosa, and they were all really, really fine players. But the one that stuck out the most was Fred, and it was because I had never played with anyone that hit a golf ball as far as he could hit it. I mean, it was just beyond comprehension for me. And when we would go play, Fred would quite literally outdrive me by 60 yards. And at any rate, it really stuck in my head. And I came home after my freshman year, and I kind of dominated Arkansas and North Texas and my little area, I guess you would say, and was just playing phenomenally well. But it just stuck in my mind that I needed to hit it further. And because Fred would quite literally outdrive me by 50 yards. And so on a really long, tough golf course, he had a huge advantage over me. I mean, I figured at a golf course like Champions, Cypress Creek course, he had a minimum of a 4-shot advantage. And I wasn't the smartest guy in the world, but I could multiply 4 times 4 and get 16, and I knew that over the course of 72 holes, he had a 16-shot advantage. There was no way I could beat him. And so I went on this distance quest. One of the last tournaments, I think it was the last tournament that I won that summer, was a tournament called Four States Amateur, and it drew a lot of really good, a really nice little regional amateur tournament. And I played a guy named Mike Mitchell in the finals, and Mike was a great player. He was a double All-American at Houston in the 60s and had played the tour for 6 or 7 years, and had just gotten his amateur status back, and I had an enormous amount of respect for Mike. And I asked him, I beat him in the finals, and he played really well. I think he was 3 under when I closed him out on 17, but I was 5, 6, 7 under for the day. I was unconscious in those days. And but I remember a few days later, I ran into Mike on the practice tee at Texarkana Country Club, and I asked him, what do I need to do to make it out there? You've played out there. What do I need to do? And he said, well, he goes, you got all the tools to do it. He goes, you hit it straight and solid, you can chip and putt, you got guts, but you're going to need to pick up some distance. He goes, because when I was on the tour, the 2 things that hurt me, I didn't putt it well enough, and I didn't hit it quite far enough. Well, I really respected Mike enormously, and so that really stuck in my brain. And when you added that to the fact that I had played with Fred for a year and he would outdrive me by tremendous distances, I knew that I had hit it farther. And so I asked a guy from here that was supposed to know something about a golf swing why I didn't hit it very far, and his exact words were, Geoff, you're never going to hit it very far hitting that block fade you hit. You've got to learn to release the club and hit a hook. And so I said, okay, well, what do I need to do? And he stuck some tees in the ground. And a lot of you guys probably can relate to this. He stuck some tees in the ground going down my intended target line, and then he stuck some tees coming well from the inside and going inside out, way out to right field. And he told me, you've got to learn to swing inside out to right field and roll your wrist to shut the toe to make it hook. And I started trying to do that, and in virtually overnight, I just couldn't play at all. Within a month, I just completely, totally lost it and started hitting vicious pull snap hooks and big blocks, and basically it short-circuited my whole golf swing. And I went from playing really, really well to, I mean, you just can't imagine how well I was hitting, at least especially when it came to consistency and an accuracy standpoint, to not being able to hit it in a 50-acre cow pasture. And, now I know why, but in those days I didn't. And it basically destroyed for my whole life for a little while. I mean, I was just devastated. And when you add to the fact that, all the emotions you go through when you're that age, and then the maturity issues, and on and on and on, it was devastating. And because I measured my self-worth by my golf scores, and all of a sudden I couldn't hit it anymore, and it was awful. I mean, that's how I can describe it. I mean, it was just awful. I would say I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but I can't. I'd have to be honest. I wouldn't mind wishing it on somebody, my enemies, but I would never wish it on someone that I had any fondness for whatsoever, because it was a horrible thing to go through, because like I said, I measured my whole self-image on my golf scores, and man, I couldn't play at all. So I will say this, though, when you're that involved with golf and it means that much to you and it's that big a part of your life, that is a tremendous incentive to get off your rear end and work. And so I worked hard, and I talked to a million guys, guys giving me advice left, right, and sideways, but of course pretty much everybody in those days, it was swing inside out and roll your wrist. And I can honestly tell you the only person that gave me advice that was worth anything was Blaine McAllister. And Blaine and I were talking one day. He called me and he asked me how I was playing, and I said, terrible. And he said, what's the matter? I said, well, I'm duck hooking it. I don't know what to do. And he goes, I can tell you what to do. strengthen your grip, aim left, and try to slice it. And, the funny thing is, when I finally got back where I could hit it again, several years later, that was in essence what I had done. And so what I'm going to do today is, that's really all the background you need, and probably already half asleep anyway, so I won't bore you with any more about myself, except that this is what I determined, and everything that I learned about how to swing a golf club came from trying to figure out my own game. I mean, I honestly could have cared less about you guys. If you shot 90, I wanted you to shoot 95, and anybody that tells you any different is not a competitor. I was very selfish and wanted to get my own game back, and managed to get back several years later where I could really hit it. And I have to give you, I guess, a little more insight. I went about 4 years floundering around on my own, stubbornly trying to find the miracle tip or, the miracle, and it wasn't there. And then I went to a fellow named John Darling in Dallas, who was a protege of Jimmy Ballard, and John really helped me. He was the only person I can honestly tell you that really helped me, and I worked really hard, and John would attest to that. He's a fine teacher out in San Diego now, and John really helped me, and I got pretty good at Mr. Ballard's method. I got really good at it, honestly, and had some success with it, enough to where I felt comfortable turning professional and played pretty good with it. And I can remember in particular playing the Nevada Open. In those days, that would have been like a nationwide event, and I played well. I finished second, was runner-up, and I can remember sitting in the hotel room that night thinking to myself that, whatever it is that I'm doing, it's not what I did when I was 17 or 18, and whatever I was doing when I was 17 or 18 is better than this, at least for me. Now, I'll say this, I didn't hit a single ball left all week, no matter how tight the holes were, and I played tee to green really well, but it just didn't feel the same. I knew it was not the same swing that I had when I was 17 or 18, when I really knew I had control over the ball. So, in short, I finished the year out, and then I just decided to figure out what I was doing when I was 17 or 18 years old. And I just pretty much did it on my own. Now, John did help me a bit. We did talk a lot of Hogan, and John had some footage that he was kind enough to give me. At that time, I started kind of worked my way in with a bunch of guys in Dallas, and we traded footage and whatnot, so I started collecting more Hogan footage. And Mr. Hogan, he's a hero of a lot of ours, and he was my idol growing up. I always said Bill Rogers was my mentor, but Ben Hogan was my idol. And Miller Barber was pretty close with Mr. Hogan and used to tell me a Hogan story or two when I was a kid. And I was fortunate enough to meet him on a few occasions, and he was hugely influential without really knowing the man. But I knew from the legends, the reverence that Bill and Miller and guys like Ben Crenshaw had for Mr. Hogan. And, of course, I had seen Follow the Sun, his movie, when I was a little boy. And my dad really held Mr. Hogan in high regard. But the main thing you always heard was that he struck the ball so much better than everybody else. And so I was lucky enough to collect some footage. One of the things was the 1963 or 4 or 5. I don't know if anybody can ever agree on the exact date. But it's the Houston Country Club match with Sam Snead, and it has the lesson with Hogan on there in regards to the first move from the top. And that lesson was especially influential on me. And so things started kind of sort of coming back together to a degree. And I got Mr. Hogan's book back out, 5 Lessons, and I started reading it again for probably the 10th time. And things sort of became clearer to a degree. And because in 5 Lessons, there's so many riddles in there that don't make a lot of sense on face value. If you read the book, they just don't make sense. I mean, he'll contradict himself on numerous occasions, and so forth and so on. But I was able to get some footage and compare it to other footage, and I noticed innumerable things that he thought he did that he didn't, and things that he did but he wasn't doing it, or maybe he wasn't describing it maybe exactly like he did it, and started picking up a few things. And around this same time, Nick Price was hanging around Dallas some and was friends with some friends of mine, and so I knew who he was, and he was starting to play better, and on the tour, and you could he was awfully good, and he could really hit it solid. And so I primarily studied Price and Hogan, and and I studied a lot of guys, but those two guys came to mind immediately because I knew from reputation that Mr. Hogan could really hit it. And when I saw him hit a few balls in '84, he certainly hit it well, and he was an older man. He was 71 years old, and Price could really hit it. And so that clued me in a little bit to study Price, study Hogan. Ledbetter was just starting to really hit his stride, and he had some things published that I read that I thought there was a lot of really good stuff in it. Of course, I was fortunate enough to be around a lot of really good players. And the bottom line was I started studying a lot of footage. I read Mr. Hogan's book again. I read Mike Hebron's book, See and Feel, The Inside Move the Outside. And for some reason or other, Mr. Hebron's book made Mr. Hogan's book makes more sense, and things started coming together. Now, I'm going to show you guys a few things here that I'm kind of basically what I do when guys come down here, because it's incredibly important that you understand. We have to establish a few things. So, if somebody comes down here, or what I try to do with my students is the first thing you got to understand is you have to understand what it is you're trying to do. And I had to have this conversation with myself. What am I trying to do? Because there was so much conflicting advice out there that I was completely lost. And that's one of the things that I figured out when I studied footage. So the first thing you got to understand is what you're trying to do. And so when you understand that, then you have to understand this. You've got to understand that there's two basic styles of ways of releasing a golf club. And what I do is I use Tommy Aaron and I use David Toms. One, because I actually know David quite a bit, and I played with him a lot, and he was a great example in the release of what I saw studying footage. And the other is Tommy Aaron, because Tommy Aaron had, my dad oohed and awed over two players' golf swings when we would go out and watch Miller play at the Nelson or Colonial when I was a little kid. And one was Tommy Aaron, the other was Sam Snead. And so I studied, a lot of these guys. And what I found was that immediately, two things. One, from a face-on view, they all looked a lot alike. I mean, honestly, the way they released the golf club, they were very similar. And the reason I focused on the release of the club was because, I had been told by Mr. Robinson, our pro at our club, that he used to tell me over and over again, Jeff Aru, if you look at those guys out on that tour, they all swing different, son. He goes, but you get them down in that impact zone, and they're all alike. Well, and Mr. Robinson played the tour in the 50s and was also a big Hogan fanatic and Hogan influence. And so I took him at his word, so I started studying footage. And from a face-on view, if they were both hitting three woods, yeah, they looked a lot alike. From a 7-iron, they looked reasonably close. They all had the shaft leading, the hands were forward, their body was opening up to a degree. But boy, when I got that down the line view, they were very different. So what I show guys is David Toms on the right and Tommy Aaron on the left, and I just take them to post-impact right there. And you'll notice that David is 4, 5, 6 inches closer to the ball than where he started, and Tommy Aaron is 5, 6, 7, 8 inches further away from it. And so, what they're doing through impact, I recognized immediately was very different, very different. And so this got me thinking, okay, maybe there's two distinct ways of releasing a golf club, and there are, of course. And I didn't know this because nobody talked about it. As a matter of fact, nobody talked about it much besides me until the last few years, and now there's a lot of guys talking about it. But the point is that they're releasing the golf club very, very differently. And so you can see that, I won't go through all the errors that Tommy Aaron makes, but what you will notice is, he's going to back away from it, back out of it, and he's unwinding his core, and then his core starts slowing down. As a matter of fact, in his case, it slows to a stop, and then he rolls the club over. And so his body, his pivot is shut down so that he could roll the club over. Well, that's classic inside-out, roll the wrist type look. Whereas from the top of David's backswing, he works toward the ground, and his trunk never slows down. Never slows down. So it's very, very different. I mean, what these two guys are doing is very, very different. So, with that in mind, I started studying footage of guys that I knew could really hit the golf ball. And what I kept seeing was the same thing over and over again. It didn't matter if it was Lee Trevino. I saw what I call leverage post-impact. It didn't matter if it was George Knudsen. This is Mr. Knudsen in his prime. And you'll notice post-impact, you can see tremendous leverage. I, of course, was studying Nick Price a ton. And when I looked at Nick Price, I saw tremendous leverage through impact. And the two primary guys that I noticed were Mr. Snead and Mr. Hogan. And I had this old footage. I've had it for a long, long time. I'm not sure where this is. I'm sure this is at the Greenbrier of Sam Snead, but I don't know for sure. I know that Mr. Hogan, this is at Tamarisk in Palm Springs in the early 50s. But post-impact, they were so similar. You could see that angle between the right arm and shaft, which once again I call leverage. So they had maintained leverage through the shot, and their core never slowed down. And so when I saw guys like Snead and Hogan so similar through the impact zone, that really got my attention. And you can look at Sam Snead and Ben Hogan, and the two things you would notice is, if you looked at Mr. Hogan's head relative to the mountains here in the background, when he hits it, his head's moved down. If you look at Sam Snead's head relative to those oak trees in the background, he's moved down. And then post-impact, you could see that the handle went around very low, and you could see the angle between the right arm and the shaft. And you could see how their left leg was posting up. At that time, I didn't know what posting up was, but I saw that. And so I had my biggest aha moment of my golf life by far. And that was, man, look at this. I mean, these guys are very, very similar. And, of course, I knew they were the two best ball strikers in the world for a long, long period of time. But then when I started comparing it to guys whose games I admired, Mr. Trevino being one, who I knew had control over the golf ball. Because that's what you have to understand about golf is that, just because you got a great golf swing and you hit it great doesn't mean you're going to be a great player. And just because you don't necessarily have that great a golf swing, technically maybe, and you're not that great a ball striker, that doesn't mean you're not going to be a great player. Because all you have to have is an ability to flight the ball with some degree of consistency and a lot of guts and heart and a willingness to sacrifice and way beyond the norm. And basically dedicate your whole life to golf. And if you're willing to do that, then you have an opportunity to be a really good player. However, if you do have a good golf swing, it does enable you to strike the ball with more consistency and more accuracy more often, which is going to allow you to place the ball in a position that you're in a position to score more often. And it also helps you to have a degree of inner calm when you're going into a competition, because you simply just don't hit wild double cross golf shots. You're always going to strike it to a degree of consistency that you can keep it on the golf course. And the bottom line is as I started studying players, I kept seeing this over and over and over again. It really didn't matter who I got. Obviously, if you saw Hogan here in the Derricott footage, you can see how strongly everything's working around. But it wasn't just in his golf swing. It was in a lot of them. I have a number of examples. I mean, this is Mike Suchek, who was a fantastic ball striker. And they say he didn't have such a bad temper that he would have won on the many, many majors. I still think he won 10 times, I believe. But you'll see where that handle went. In post-impact, you can see the leverage. Well, I knew he was a great ball striker. I knew Jack Burke was a great ball striker. And so Mr. Burke coming down through impact and post-impact, you could see leverage. Don January was a very close friend of my dad's and Miller Barber's best friend, so I knew Mr. January pretty well. And he was a great ball striker for 50 years, literally, or 40 years. And once again, you saw the same thing. Post-impact, tremendous leverage. Kerry Middlecoff, you could see tremendous leverage post-impact right there. There was just so many of them. Roberto De Vicenzo, great, probably won 150 tournaments worldwide, including the British Open in '67. And you can see where the handle went. And post-impact, you could see tremendous leverage. And so I kept noticing this. You had a guy like Tommy Bolt, and you saw post-impact, that there was definitely no rolling. I mean, whatever they were doing, they were not doing what you just saw Tommy Aaron do. Bob Goulby right here, 1968 Masters champion. I just kept seeing the same things over and over again. Kenny Venturi here, 64 United States Open champion. Post-impact with a wood here. I mean, you could see the shaft in the right arm. And so whatever he's doing, he's not doing what not doing what Tommy Aaron was doing at all. Of course, this is great Hogan footage right here. You can see where the handle's going. You know, and I was smart enough to realize what he's doing right there. His right arm's still flexed, and you know, he had a definite angle between the right arm and the shaft, and so forth and so on. And it just had a very powerful impression upon me that, wait a minute, you know, maybe there's two very distinct ways of releasing the golf club, and there are. And in no book that I had read to that point was that ever mentioned. Ever. It was always, you know, you got to roll your wrist or turn the knuckles of your lead hand at the ground or turn the toe of the club at the ground. And so that really got me to thinking. And then I had a huge ha-ha moment that now I know why it felt. Mr. Ballard, when I was doing Ballard stuff, it was basically you were trying to, quote, release your right side, but there was a tremendous amount of rotation in the right arm or extension of the right arm through impact. Otherwise, I'd hit it way right. And that was the feeling I hated. I hated that armsy, handsy feeling through impact. So, and then I realized, you know, this is what I was doing when I was playing really well. It's also the way that Bill Rogers released the club. And so I'm just assuming that, you know, through watching his golf swing for all those years that I just mimicked as a kid, you know, just started swinging like him because I never really had any lessons when I was growing up, formal lessons. You know, you just basically played golf and some people got good and some didn't. I was fortunate enough that was taught to grip it correctly and so forth from a very early age, but I just stumbled upon the release that Hogan and Snead and Trevino and Venturi and a jillion other guys were using. And then when this fellow here saw me swing the club, he thought I was blocking it because he didn't see that rolling of the club and the right arm and shaft extending down the line and so forth and so on. And so that was the primary thing that I learned. Was gosh, there's two ways of releasing this golf club, and man, they do look a lot alike from a face-on view, but from a down-the-line view, they're very, very different. And so that started the whole deal. And everything I learned from that point forward was based on trying to figure out, okay, I see different players swinging obviously differently, but they're arriving in the same impact, essentially the same way. You know, they're releasing the golf club in a very similar fashion. They were either flipping it or they were rotating it. I mean, that's the bottom line. They were either turning it through with leverage or they were throwing their hands at it like it's going out of style. And so then I start studying golf swings, and I came to the conclusion that to make this really simple, that, you know, the golf swing wasn't that big a deal. It was 5 fundamentals: grip, posture, alignment, stance, and ball position. And then there were 2 basic parts of a golf swing. There was the pivot, which was how you were winding and unwinding the core of your body and transferring weight, and an arm swing. And as I really got into it later on, I started noticing different styles. And so I saw 4 basic styles of pivot. One would be a kind of a teeter-totter. A lot of people call it reverse pivot, but it isn't. It's just a style of pivot. Then you have a true centered type pivot, like a Jeff Maggard, I guess, would be a reasonable example. Then you had what I call turning into the right side, and then you have what you call turning over the right side. And that's what I call it. That's not any scientific terminology. That's just what I call it. But I saw those 4 styles of pivot, and then I had obviously seen the 2 basic release styles. Now, there's variations of both of them, but basically in a golf swing, you're either making the club release or you're allowing it to release. And what I obviously found was that the best swingers of the club, the pivot was heavily in control of the swing, and the arms and the club were always reacting. They were always reacting. They were never in charge. Maybe on some kind of little specialty shot, but they were never in charge. And so that's what helped me to understand that, you know, that you've got to build a great golf swing. You have to make a conscious decision day one. You have to understand how you want to release it. I mean, do you want to release the club by a conscious action of your arms and hands, or do you want physics releasing it? Do you want the club head reacting and the ball just getting in the way? Well, I had played both ways with a degree of success, and I knew darn well for me I didn't want to be involved in the release of the club because things going way too fast. And so I started this, searching to try to put this thing together, and did eventually put it back together to where I could hit it, pretty well. And I got it back to the point where by the time I was about 29 or 30, I hit it, as good or better than I ever did when I was 17 or 18, and I hit it a lot farther because I was a lot bigger and stronger. And the big difference was when I was 17 or 18, I had no idea what I was doing. At 29, I knew exactly what I was doing and how I built it. And it was not easy because I didn't have somebody like me to guide me because I was in uncharted waters. Nobody talked about any of this stuff. You could get bits and pieces of it if you read 5 Lessons or Mr. Hebron. I was never fortunate enough to meet Mr. Hebron. But you could kind of put it together if you read a lot of different books. Percy Boomer on Learning Golf is another good one. But there was no detailed, and in my opinion, there's still not one. I mean, that's why Rob and I are writing a book, and I've also found out that writing a book is not nearly as easy as people think it is. It's a tremendous amount of work, and especially if you're trying to get it right, which we are. But anyway, back to the swing. You as a golfer have to make a physical change if you're going to improve your golf swing. I mean, you're going to have to change something because, not all of you, because some of you will swing the club well, I'm sure, but most of you do need to make serious substantive changes to your swing if you really want to build a golf swing that will repeat, both for power and accuracy, especially under pressure. Well, to do that, you have to understand what you're trying to do. I mean, there has to be a degree of understanding. You have to have a foundation. You have to understand, why am I making these changes? And so you need to understand what both the long-term picture is. This is our map. This is our destination. This is where we're working towards. And here's the pit stops along the way. Here's the map, and we've got to go from A to B first, and then B to C, and so forth. And it really comes down to making a conscious decision on right here, the impact zone, hip high to hip high, and how you're going to release that golf club. Are you going to make it release? Or are you going to allow it to release? And you better make that decision day one. That's why it's so important that you get with a teacher that's really good. And the vast majority of guys and girls out there that don't have a clue. I mean, they really don't. I don't mean to offend anybody, but I guess if you get offended, then you're one of them that doesn't have a clue. But they couldn't tell you the difference between the two release styles and multiple pivots and so forth. They wouldn't have any idea, and they're basically just out there parroting the same BS that they heard when they were growing up, and they really don't have any concrete core values, and so they're not going to be able to really help you because they're going to be a lot of them are just band-aiding you up based on what they're working on in their own game, or what they read in Golf Digest this month, or what they heard at some seminar for 2 hours, or whatever. And to really be good at this, you have to dedicate your life to it, and you have to spend years studying it to try to put the pieces together. And so that's why, and that's basically what I did, obviously with no intention of being a teacher, really, per se, but just trying to find my own game. And when I did, it opened me up to this wonderful world of trying the golf swing as a whole. And as I was saying a minute ago, you got to make a decision, guys, as to how you're going to release the golf club. What's going to go on from hip height to hip height. Once you make that decision, then you can go forward with the method or swing that you're trying to kind of fit yourself into. And these guys that say they're not method teachers, well, they're not method teachers because they don't know what they're doing. I mean, they don't have any core values. You have to have a foundation to base your teaching off of, and it's extremely important. It doesn't mean you try to teach everybody the same way, because I don't do that. I mean, if I have a 70-year-old man walk in here with 2 arthritic hips, we're not going to be doing a whole lot of rotation. So that does not mean you teach everybody the same thing. It just means you have concrete core beliefs as to what you think the best way of swinging a golf club is. And that could be multiple ways. I mean, depending on the person's body type or their physical limitations and infirmities, so forth. But the bottom line is that you guys have to find somebody that understands the golf swing, and then can help you to understand multiple things about the golf swing, multiple ways of swinging the club, and then can help you to figure out what it is that you want to do, and then walk you through the journey, because it will be a journey. There will be no quick magic golf swing. It's never happened in history, and it's not going to start now. It takes a tremendous amount of dedication, a tremendous amount of work, and there's just no way around it. If you're not willing to be extremely dedicated, well beyond the norm, I wouldn't even start golf. And I've said this stuff for years. I have very strong opinions, and one is, from going through what I went through, I learned that if you're not willing to dedicate, tremendous amount of time and energy to golf, you're never going to build a golf swing of any real substance. It's not going to happen, because it takes a very rare individual to really be really good at anything. I mean, whether it's singing or dancing or playing a guitar or a violin or hitting a golf ball or baseball or throwing a football, it takes a singular dedication that most people simply are not willing to do. They're just not willing to put in the time and do it in the right manner. And that's why I recommended the guys to read The Talent Code and read Talent is Overrated, because those two books really lay it out. And I can't tell you how much I agree with those two books, but they mirror what I've said for 20 years or more. There's no quick fix. There's no magic. There's no magic. No magic. I mean, Band-Aid type instruction is exactly that. It's Band-Aid type instruction. Now, to defend the Band-Aiders, and I think I'm one of the best in the business at Band-Aiding, because all Band-Aiding is understanding ball flight and understanding the five basic components of impact: the path, the angle of attack, the face as it relates to those two things, how fast that club head's going, and where the low point of that arc is relative to that ball. And if you understand those five things, then you can watch what a golf ball's doing, and you can figure out if somebody's hooking it. It's just as simple as open the face or weaken their grip sometimes. If they're spinning out over it, you can close their stance down, square in their left foot, then they can't spin out anymore. And there's a bunch of things you can do to get instantaneous better results. However, those are Band-Aids, and rarely do they last very long. So the main thing, I guess, out of this little section of what we're talking about is to understand that, in my opinion, you've got to determine, before you get started on the journey, where is your destination? Meaning, in golf, how am I trying to release the club? What do I want to have going on through impact? And once you've determined that, then there's any number of methods, because every method will have an established release criteria. Every method will have an established setup criteria. And so it's going to be incredibly important that you understand a couple of things right off the bat. How do I grip it and set up to it for this method? And then what am I trying to ingrain from hip height to hip height? 9 to 3 area. Because I believe this, and I know it's true because I've helped people to do it for 20-something years. If you can get set up right, and you can build, in essence, the golf swing that you're trying to ingrain or own from 9 to 3, it's simply not a big deal at all to take that and stretch it into a longer backswing, which will then give you more to unwind with on the downswing. And the next thing you know, 9 to 3 is turned into a full golf swing. But if you can't do it correctly from 9 to 3 with a pitching wedge or sand wedge or 9-iron or whatever, I don't know why you would think you could go get a longer club and make a bigger swing and fix anything. And yet I see, quote, teachers out there all the time on practice tees all over the world with students of theirs, and they've got them out there hitting 5-irons. Well, I was a pretty good ball striker in my day, and when I got a 5-iron in my hand, buddy, I was just trying to hit it in the middle of the face and hit it on the green. And there's a great story about Fred Couples. When he first went on tour, Tom Watson took him under his wing and invited Fred to go to Kansas City, just watch some Royals games and kind of hang out for a few days. And while they were there, Fred asked Watson a question. He said, "Tom, what are you thinking when you've got a 4-iron in your hand?" And he said, "Well, Fred, when I've got a 4-iron in my hand, the only thing I'm trying to do is hit it solid and hit it on the green." And Fred supposedly said, "Well, thank God." Because the best players in the world, when they get 4 or 5 irons in their hand, they're just trying to hit it in the middle of the face and get it on the green somewhere. And so if the best players in the world at the highest levels are trying to hit a 5-iron in the middle of the face and hit it solid, hit it on the green, what chance do you think an average amateur has going out there and improving their golf swing, making full swings with a 5-iron? Basically zero. But I bet if you guys will look back on all the lessons you've taken, you've hit an awful lot of 5-irons. And that's, in my opinion, asinine. It does not work and never will work. So, in summary, the thing that I think is incredibly, incredibly important for you guys is to pick a release style. Understand that there's 2 styles, and then there's, I guess you could say, sub-styles underneath that. But you need to get an idea, are you going to release the club, or are you going to allow the club head to magically release when the ball gets in the way? Once you've determined that, then you can start looking around at different swing methods to try to figure out what makes the most sense to you. And then be prepared to be dedicated for not 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but be dedicated the rest of your golfing life to that method. Because once you've made that a commitment, you are all in. And you better stay with it, because if you do the typical golfer route and bounce from method to method to method, golf club to golf club to golf club, I mean driver to driver to driver, putter to putter to putter, set irons to set irons to set irons, DVD series to DVD series to DVD series, book to book to book, you're never going to be any good. You're going to end up with an awful lot of good clubs in your garage and a bunch of books and DVDs in your library, but you're not going to be able to play a lick. Because it's incredibly important that you make a determination of what you're trying to do and then stick with it. Now, that does not mean that along the way you won't get an idea here or a little, there's always bends in the road. You're on your journey, but rarely is it going to be a straight line. I mean, it's going to be an up and down journey. And, there are going to be times maybe something's invented that, a teaching aid or you hear of just a thought or an image that really clicks with you. You always need to be aware of that. However, you need to understand where you are day one, where you're trying to go. So basically, where are you starting from, where's your destination, and you need to have a map to get from where you are at present to your destination. And if you do that, then if you're willing to work awfully hard, you're going to have an opportunity to build something that's worth building and worth owning. All right, I could go forward. We can sit here for hours today talking about untold things. Once I get rolling on this stuff, gosh, with all the video that I have and all this studying and talking to different guys on a golf swing, I could talk forever. So I won't bore you anymore. But in essence, that is what I believe that every golfer should understand, at least in a very rudimentary, generic way, before they ever get started in an attempt to build a substantive golf game of real consequence, something that has a chance to be a low single-digit handicapper or possibly a scratch player or better. But it's also pretty good advice for everyone, and no matter what you're attempting to do. If you're going to be, I teach all the kids that I work with that, you're only going to get one shot on this road of life as we know it. There's a window open for you of opportunity, but you might as well go ahead and take advantage of the opportunities you have and be great at something. I don't really care if they're a great doctor or lawyer or golfer or tennis player or singer. Just be great at something and try to teach them, look, to be great at something, this is the type of dedication that it takes. And I really am very straightforward, because I want to see kids not make the same mistakes that I did, or mistakes that I was able to live vicariously through others. I saw others make mistakes, and I thankfully was smart enough not to make the same ones. And so I'm trying to educate kids not only how to swing a golf club and how to play golf, but also in regards to how to use golf to develop a degree of self-discipline and practice habits, which you can then turn and use in other areas of your life that will give you an opportunity to be successful and very successful. I've got former students that are now doctors and lawyers and very successful ones. And that's very rewarding to me when they tell me that something that I helped them with in regards to golf actually impacted them in their life in areas that had nothing to do with golf. So that's one of the things that I would like to add to the end of this particular DVD, is that golf is such a wonderful game, and you can learn so many different things through golf and vicariously through golf that can really help you with your whole life. And and I try, like I said, I guess this is primarily toward kids, but that's the one thing that I really want to stress in this DVD, But at any rate, I hope you found what I was talking about interesting, and if you have any questions, feel free to email and at gjones@aol.com, and I'll be happy to try to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you very much, and once again, thanks to Ralph for inviting me to do it. Okay, now that we've covered kind of sort of how I got started on this thing, one of the things that I noticed was no matter who I went and got, if they were a good player, when they struck the ball, from a face-on view, the handle was always forward of the head and always substantially forward of where they started. And they had gotten into their left side, and it was obvious to me they were unwinding around their left side. That was evident really quick. And so one of the things you see in all good players, when they strike it, I mean, they hit it with leverage. They've maintained the leverage through the shot. They're not dumping their leverage at the golf ball. And so that was something I saw early on. Davis Love here, you can see how far forward the handle is. They have delayed the release of the club, and honestly, the more powerful they hit it and the more penetrating they hit it, the more it seemed to be leaning, and the more they were into their left side. So you can see how similar these two guys look, and they're both really good players, so obviously. But it didn't really matter who I went and got. They all look like that. So anybody that I've got that can hit it, they're all going to have that look. They're going to have that golf club. They're going to be compressing the ball with tremendous leverage, and that leverage is releasing at the last possible second. And these were things that weren't really talked about a lot. I didn't see these specifics about impact mentioned a whole lot in books I was reading and so forth and so on. Now, I'm certainly not saying it wasn't mentioned, but it wasn't stressed, that's for sure. You saw Matt right there. You can see where he is at address in the yellow and where he is when he hits it. Well, both Matt and Josh are striking these balls with tremendous leverage. They're not dumping the leverage into the ground, which so many players do, and the club is releasing fully. It's not held on to. But in neither case are they trying to roll their wrists or touch their forearms or anything like that. They both have struck it with tremendous force. And so that was something that I noticed in the course of my own game. I was so far inside and dumping. I had to dump the leverage badly through impact in order to be able to square the face up. And that was a result of getting so far inside trying to swing inside out. So one of the things that you'll notice, about all of mine is that they're going to strike that thing, delaying those levers until the last possible second, yet the club's going to release fully. It's not going to be held on to. They're going to have, in a full swing, they're going to have a very released look, and that'll go for the driver, just like, Jason hitting that driver right there versus a guy like Stuart Appleby hitting a driver right here. In both instances, there's a lot of common ground right there in that they both have delayed the release of the leverage until the last possible second, and they certainly are nowhere near where they started, because one of the old cliches that I used to hear a lot when I was a kid was that all you're trying to do at impact is come back to where you were at address, and nothing could be further from the truth. There's very little common ground between impact and address, unless you're doing John Schlee maximum golf, and then there is certainly a degree of commonality between address and impact, but I don't like to see you set up at impact unless you're doing a drill. So that's the thing that I noticed, pretty quickly. So that was what I would notice in guys. It didn't really matter how they swung the club. If I impact and I knew they were a really good driver of the ball, I would see very similar angles. And that, and then I would compare it to myself, and I would say, well, I don't look anything like that. Well, why don't I? And start trying to work backwards. I believe in going to impact, actually going, 2 or 3 frames post-impact, and then go backwards to try to figure out how a swing works. So if I remember when Furyk first hit the scene, I couldn't wait to get to Augusta to film him to try to figure out how he made that nightmarish-looking golf swing work. Faraday called it, said Furyk looks like an octopus in a phone booth, and that's a pretty good description. But he's one of the best ever through impact. And so that was something that I noticed, very quickly, that, these guys would start where they started at address and where they ended up when they hit it. They were very different, and there were certain commonalities to swings that I either had played with guys I knew they could really hit it, or I knew from their peers' reputation could really hit it. Mr. Hogan would be the ultimate example of peer respect and ability to strike a golf ball. And so these are things that I noticed immediately, really, really quick from studying footage. Okay, another thing that I understood was that you had to strike the ball from the inside. So I knew that the club head had to attack on an arc from the inside. So it was coming from inside back to the inside. In other words, the club head is traveling on an arc, so it's going to travel down from the inside, strike the ball, and then it had to go back to the inside. It didn't come from where I got so fouled up, as I was told to try to feel like the club head's going that way. That's a real bad idea. Now, is the club technically traveling from, you could call inside out when you strike the ball? Sure it is, but it's not going inside out across the line to right field, which was the piece of advice that I got that was essentially career-ending. And so in Matt's case right here, you can see where the club's being delivered from an overhead camera view, and it's working back to the inside. And so this is the same thing you would see when you study Hogan. See, I had tons of Hogan footage, and this is a pretty good instance from Seminole footage, and you can see where it looks like he's swinging. I mean, the ball's obviously going way over here, but it looks like he's swinging his body into this bunker over here. And it's very deceptive looking. And a lot of people, it kind of freaks them out when they see the man right here because it looks like he's swinging over here into these trees. Well, it's really not that big a deal because in his backswing, he's simply winding up this way to his right, and his arms are going to travel back over there, and the club head's going to travel back over there. So everything is moving, turning and moving to his right. Well, the downswing is just simply a polar opposite effect. He'll transition enough to get into his left leg, and then everything's going to track down back around over there. And so things started slowly to come together, and I could understand why guys released it one way and why guys released it another. And then there was some Hogan footage that I had. That's a pretty good piece right there from Seminole, but I had another piece that I got probably 20 years ago that's shown up on YouTube in the last, 3 or 4 years. And it's a very influential piece of Hogan footage. It was one of the most influential for me. And that was this piece of footage right here from overhead. And I got this probably 20 years ago. I don't remember who gave it to me. But it's, I believe it's taken during the footage where he's hitting balls and he's got the wall behind him with all the lines on it and whatnot. But what you could see was when he struck the ball, a number of things. As soon as he hit the ball, the club head, you could see where it's tracking back to the inside, just like Matt's did. It's tracking back to the inside. So if I go get this piece of footage, and we know it's Hogan, and I go like that, and then I come over here and I get this piece of footage of Matthew right here, what you can see is that when he strikes the ball, almost immediately that club head's already turning back to the inside. So it's hard to split screen it here, but you can see where the club head's going. Well, Hogan is doing exactly the same thing. And so it became apparent immediately that he was not swinging inside out. To the contrary, the club swung from the inside, did strike it with the club head coming from the inside, but it immediately at post-impact went back to the inside. Well, that made 100% sense to me because the ball is on the ground and away from you, and you're swinging on an inclined plane, so you're swinging on an angle that's like that, and so let me draw it a little better than that. But the club head's going to travel down on an arc that's coming from the inside, and so it had to travel something like that because that's where the arc is going this way, and so it's only actually traveling down the target line for a nanosecond. But I've of course been told that I had to swing it over there, and I'm sure many of you have been told that too. And that's a very poor piece of advice. It's also readily apparent that he's not flipping anything because you can see the lever of his right arm and his right wrist, and when he strikes the ball, you'll see he's still got a crease in his right wrist, and he's still got his right arm is still set. So here's two levers in effect in my teaching. That's a lever and that's a lever, and he has maintained those levers through impact, therefore he struck it with leverage. And the only way you can do that is the pivot has to be in charge. You can't be slowing the pivot down. And I had an advantage. I got into a debate with Tom Bertrand one night on GolfWorks he was saying that Hogan was using his right arm in some capacity and his hands in some capacity through impact, and I just disagreed respectfully because I had this piece of footage. And I knew that in order to do anything with the right arm, the pivot has to slow down, and there's no way to maintain that kind of leverage through the ball if the pivot isn't in charge. It's virtually impossible. I mean, I guess you could maintain it to the last possible second and then put the put the brakes on your pivot and maybe be able to maintain it to a degree like he did through impact, but it's practically impossible. And of course, when you watch Hogan footage, you don't ever see his right shoulder slow down, which lets you know that his core is continuing to move. And so that's something that you'll see very prominently in all of mine. So if I go over here and I get, anybody that I've had, substantive effect upon, like Matt, if you watched his right shoulder, you will never see it slow down because it doesn't. His core continues to rotate all the way through the shot. Now, there's a lot of variables that go into getting yourself in position to be able to do this, but it was apparent that there's no stalling going to be going on with any of mine. I mean, you're not going to see that right shoulder slow down because the goal is to get that club set at the top and then just let it rip, let it go. But you got to, there's a lot of prerequisites that go into this, but you won't see that right shoulder stalling out. Another thing I'm proud of is you're not going to see a bunch of clones. If you know what to look for, you're going to see the same basic movements and basically the same sequence of movement, and you're going to see the same tendencies that they're going to be on similar angles at the top, and they're going to be on similar angles at the top because they set up on similar angles to begin with. They're going to be very pivot-centered. Their golf swing is going to be, they're not going to have a centered pivot per se, because it depends on one's definition of a centered pivot, but that they are definitely, you're not going to see a bunch of sliding around. You're not going to see, quote, any weight shift, because in what we do, there is no weight shift, there's a weight transition. And it's definite. There is a weight transition, but there's not a weight shift. And if you watch Kendall right here and you watch her right shoulder, you will not see it stall because it's not going to. And because at the top of the backswing, I knew that in my own game at one time, once I got to the top, if I got everything in good order at the top, all I had to do was just get out of my own way as hard as I could, and the arms in the club were 100% reacting to the pivot. And so therefore I had to pivot correctly. And therefore I had to try to figure out what was a correct pivot that would enable me to consistently put myself in a position at the top so that all I had to do was just unwind and hit it. And that's what I did when I was 17 or 18 years old, but I didn't know what I was doing. I just did it. And so therefore there was a lot of things that went into getting yourself in position at the top so that the downswing became nothing more than just letting it go. And very few methods get you into that position. Most of them, you're going to have to do something in the transition. Do something with your right arm, or try to hold your left shoulder back and force the arms out away from you, or you're going to have to start down, and about halfway down you have to start stalling the body so you can direct the club excessively from the inside out so that you can then make room for the rotation of the forearms or hands in order to square the toe. And so, I didn't like any of that. So because I was lucky enough that I had done it without doing that, and I had also been taught a method where I had to do that, where I had to stall and I had to use my arms. And I can still to this day go out on the range and tell you, okay, I'm going to flip this one, and I can slow everything down and really release my arms, and I can hit a pretty high draw, and it looks great. But under pressure, that thing would turn into blocks and rope hooks. And in my experience, any player that gets good at that type of golf swing is going to be a blocker, hooker, rope hooker, and occasionally snap hooker. So you don't want to do that. That's why you got to get yourself in position at the top so that all you have to do is simply let her go, which is a very simple move into your left leg or lead leg, and then around so that the arms and the club can work down plane and then around, and the club head will naturally release itself. So that's basically what we do. And the whole goal is impact, is understanding. I knew early on that you had to hit it from the inside. I mean, both ways of swinging, whether I was coming excessively from the inside and rolling it, stalling and rolling, or whether I had it to the top and all I had to do was unwind, the downswing, as far as where the club was attacking from, it was definitely attacking from the inside. And I've also played from unbelievably narrow at one time, and when you get really narrow in your downswing, then you're going to have a very steep angle of attack. And so, and I could go on and on for hours trying to explain, or explaining the differences between narrow and a narrow good player steep and an average amateur spin over the top, quote, over the top, who gets it can even be very wide, but it's a very steep angle of attack from the effect that's coming too much from the outside. But I'm not going to bother with that. We'll save that for another day. But what I promised Ralph I would do for you guys is to try to give you a basic understanding of what it is that I do and how I learned what it is that I learned, because I was influenced by any number of people, from Percy Boomer to Mr. Hogan extensively, Mike Hebron, David Ledbetter. Ledbetter stuff from the early mid-'80s to the early '90s was fantastic stuff. There's a lot of great stuff in there, tremendous stuff in there, honestly. Jim McLean has some fantastic stuff. I do not agree with trying to restrict the hips and the backswing. I think that's a big mistake. But he is correct in that your shoulders are going to wind up approximately twice as much as your shoulders. And the more you can wind up, the more potential torque you can create and the more speed you can create in your core. I just don't agree with trying to restrict the hips, and I'm not sure he would agree with that nowadays either. But he had some tremendous stuff. There's any number of sources of quality information. The problem I found was that nobody really put it all together. And so I had to put it all together myself. So whatever it is that I do, you want to call it Slicefixer method or whatever it is, I'm not really comfortable calling it my swing. But I was able to put together what I considered to be the simplest way to swing a golf club. And I did it through a wide variety of sources. My friend Alex Ruggiero, Hogan fan on GolfWorks, says, you know, Jones, he goes, you found a breadcrumb here and a breadcrumb there, and put it all together in like a loaf of bread. In essence, you found a crumb here and a crumb there following the trail. And that's a pretty good description. It took a tremendous amount of reading. It took a tremendous amount of study, observation, and primarily my eyes and study and footage. And I was able to discern some things, and the result is, you know, you end up with a golf swing that looks similar to this. I don't see how you can swing a golf club a whole lot simpler than that one or this one. And while they're not exactly alike, they certainly bear a lot of common ground, and they were both heavily influenced by me, so I can take a lot of credit for the guiding part in both Matthew and Kendall building their golf swings. And there's a bunch of other ones, but these are just the two best. And, you know, the bottom line is the best piece of advice I can give to people is, if you don't like these two golf swings, you know, I'm probably not the guy to come see, because the core values that I formed over many, many years of both playing and practicing and studying and reading were the result of you know, these two golf swings. And they're both awfully good golf swings, and they both result in, you know, the same general impact characteristics. They're both going to hit it with tremendous force, yet the club is going to go ahead and release. And so they both have a lot of common ground there. And to me, when you're working on your golf swing, you need to, like I spoke in the other section, you need to have a concrete understanding of what it is you're trying to accomplish, in essence, the big picture. To put it into I use a lot of analogies and imagery and things, and a lot of it I just thought up out of my own goofy ADD brain. But, you know, one of them is, you know, if you're take a journey, a trip, and you're going into the Yukon, one, you've got to be prepared before you ever leave camp, meaning that you've got to have, you got to be prepared for the journey, meaning you've got to have all the necessary equipment to handle any situation you may find yourself in, whether it's medical equipment or proper clothing or tents and foods and so forth and so on. Well, in golf, to me, before you ever start working on the golf swing, you got to have your hands on the club right, and you've got to be set up on reasonably fundamentally sound angles. Once you've achieved a fundamentally sound setup, which is simply grip and posture and getting yourself aligned correctly so that your shoulders and your hips are relatively square to your intended line of flight and to each other. You're set on the correct tilts or angles. Once you've accomplished those two things, or in stance and ball position to a degree, obviously, but to me it's, you know, it's grip and posture and alignment and stance and ball position. And once you've achieved those 5 things, then you're ready to set out through the Yukon. And it will be just like you're leaving that camp with your horses packed and ready for any eventuality. No situation you get in you can't handle. Obviously, in a situation of making a journey through the Yukon, it's life or death. And in a way, if you're not prepared to take the club back, I wouldn't even start it back, because I have a lot of statements I've made up, but one of them is you can set up for success or you can set up for failure and try to overcome it in the golf swing motion. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, given the alternative. You know, you need to be set up correctly. And every method that I've studied that I know is a successful method has a certain criteria in the setup, whether it's stack and tilt and stacking the 3C stacking the 3 COGs, or if it's a Ballard, which is a very tripodish type setup, or what we do, which is more of a classic reverse K. I've never claimed to have invented a reverse K setup, but what I did figure out was, I was told a reverse K when I was a little bitty boy, but what I did figure out was why to do it and how to do it. And so because people can tell you to set up on a reverse K, but if you don't know why you should do it, then you're probably not going to stick with it, particularly if it feels incredibly foreign. And I know I wrote plenty about this on GolfWorks, so there should be miles of information in the archives on GolfWorks, but this is incredibly important to get set up right. And I don't remember how old I was when I first heard about a reverse K, but I was a little boy. I was told when I was a little boy, you set up on top with your head on top of an iron, you set up behind the driver. Well, that makes great sense, and you do need to do that, but if you set up on bad angles and then try to set your head up behind the ball, you're just going to get on a whole lot worse angles. And so you have to be set up on the correct angles to begin with, and then you can simply make some simple adjustments to set up so that you're going to be able to strike the ball from fundamentally sound impact conditions, meaning because there's only 5 things that determine where a ball goes. I mean, it's the path the club's traveling on, the angle of attack the club head's traveling on, the angle of the face of the club relative to those 2 things, how fast it's going, and the low point of that arc where the club bottoms out. Because when that thing bottoms out, it's going to be trying to truck back around to the left. And so when I teach, it's very simple. When I want to Band-Aid somebody, say I've got a guy, maybe he's an accountant, and it's April 16th, and he's got to play a tournament in a week. Well, I'm simply going to look at what the golf ball's doing and combine that with what the divot's doing, and it gives me a real clear understanding about what Band-Aid to give him to improve one or all of those 5 things, particularly the path, the angle of attack, or the face. And if a guy's attacking from too shallow, then I may have him put a little more weight on his left side of the dress, and I may have him strengthen his grip a little bit. Therefore, he's more on his left side, so the low point's now forward. The stronger grip is going to counteract the fact that the head's now traveling too much from the inside, so it'll want to square up. So immediately he starts hitting the ball more solid and more accurately because the face squares up. However, I'm going to tell him right then, this is a Band-Aid. This is not here's where I'll film it, of course, and I'm going to show him this is where you are, and this is why this Band-Aid is going to work. But it is a Band-Aid. It's not likely to last the rest of your life. And what you really need to do is once the tournament's over with, you need to make some changes so that the club is not attacking from so far inside. And usually they're very simple changes. It almost always starts in some combination of either in the way they set up or the way they started the club back. And the other common error is in the transition. So if you've got a guy that's too steep in his backswing, he's going to have a lot more lateral in his transition to shallow the golf club. If you've got a guy that's excessively shallow, he's going to have to be able to get into that left leg and get around. He can't have a whole lot of lateral drive in his transition. So I could go on and on and on for hours with examples, but the point, I guess, is that it's vitally important that, and as I said in the other section of this whatever you want to call lessons or DVDs or whatever they are, it's absolutely vital that you understand before you start on the journey where you are and where you're trying to go to. You need to understand the whole deal. And if somebody's really good at it, they can explain it in very simple terms that you'll understand and can grasp. Then you have to understand each section of the journey. And there's not a great deal, they're not overly complicated. I personally don't think a golf swing's that complicated, but it does take a great deal of patience and time, just like a trip. I mean, you're not going to get from New York to L.A. in the blink of an eye. It's going to take time, and there's a process to that journey, and a person has to be prepared for it. If they're not, they're never going to be a golfer of any real consequence. It's just the way it is. I've been doing this for 47 years, and I've been around a lot of great players, and the one common thing between all great players is a passion for the game and a patience that they either are taught or they develop over time, and some people are actually born more patient. And you have to have that. If you don't, I wouldn't even start playing golf because it is a very difficult game under the best circumstances. And building a golf swing is a real challenge. It's basically the challenge of your entire lifetime. So I highly recommend that you read The Talent Code or read Talent is Overrated. I'm sure there's some other great books, but those books probably lay out in more technical terms and scientific terms what I've been harping for 20-something years, and that there are no shortcuts. You will pay your dues,
And if you're going to be good, you're going to have to be willing to do all the same things that all good players have done. And to me, it's just like anything else in life. A doctor is not going to drive by Harvard Medical School, roll down his electric window, and they throw the diploma in the front seat. It's going to take anywhere from 13 to 15 years post-high school before they're going to perform their first surgery. And it's a long journey. It's a process to getting there. The same thing with a guy, I'm sure we all know guys that barely graduated from high school and they've gone on to have tremendously successful companies. For instance, I know several guys that are in the construction business that have been very successful. And I don't think any of them have construction engineering degrees. Every single one of them out of high school went to work for a contractor, learned the business, spent 6, 8, 10 years learning the business, then went out on their own and spent 4, 5, 6, 8 years solidifying their business so that it was successful. And I can't think of one that was successful overnight. It took anywhere from 10 to 15 years from the time they graduated high school till they were truly successful. And it's the same thing in anything in life, in my opinion. I mean, if you look at people historically, people think that doctors sacrifice tremendously to become doctors, and they do. They sacrifice 13 to 15 years post-high school before they start collecting a check. But it's the same thing in any other successful businessman I've ever known. They all paid, 10, 12, 15 years worth of dues at least before they were really successful. All the great golf instructors I know have all dedicated their life to this deal. There are no fly-by-night successes in golf. There are a bunch of guys that work all the political angles and self-promote and on and on and on. And if they play it right, they create an illusion of really being knowledgeable and great teachers, when in reality, if you look in their background, they've never taken one kid from start to finish and created a great golf swing. They've never done it. Because the unfortunate thing about my business now is that there's a lot of charlatans out there, and they're trying to shortcut the process. They do not want to go. They don't want to pay the dues. I see that all the time with kids, unfortunately. And I have a good friend of mine, who's a very successful contractor, and I asked him. I said, "How many guys do you see coming in to your office? And when they just graduated from college and they want a job, basically they walk into your office in the first day and, hey, $100,000 a year, and I'll take that corner office over there." They're not willing to spend 6 months on probation, emptying trash and loading equipment and doing all the things that's necessary to learn the business from the ground up and get a practical understanding and knowledge of the business. They just want to start from the top, and that doesn't work, especially in my business. And another thing is that I have a fairly good understanding of what I do is not. I think I'm very good at what I do. One of the better ones on the planet, but I certainly don't know everything, and I also realize that I'm not performing brain surgery or fixing bad hearts. I mean, I'm just a golf professional, and there's a lot of guys and girls that are outstanding at what I do, and none of us are going to get any true results unless we get a certain small percentage of our students who are willing to pay the price, that are willing to put in the work, that are willing to dedicate their life to building a quality golf game. I know the manufacturers probably don't like me telling you this, and I know a lot of golf pros don't like me telling you this because, they want to sell elaborate lesson packages, and the manufacturers want to sell you some turbocharged driver or set of irons or so forth and so on. But there is no swing method that's going to yield instantaneous results. Now, in some circumstances, if you have a guy that's already swinging similar to that method and they're a pretty proficient player, they can see instantaneous results, seemingly, meaning pretty quick results. But the average person reading that book or studying those DVDs or taking lessons from this guy, they're not going to see instantaneous results. They're going to have to pay their dues. The same thing with a magic driver or putter. I mean, sometimes you can get a driver and just pick it up off the rack and it fits you perfectly and you drive the ball better. But that same driver with the wrong shaft or the wrong loft or the wrong length or wrong flex point or wrong amount of torque could be a disaster. You'd hit it all over the place. So, rather than trying to hope for blind luck to find a golf game, you need to be prepared to pursue it the correct way. And I won't go back to what I talked about in the earlier segment, but I can't accentuate this point enough. It is, you just have to make a determination about what it is that you want to do and then be prepared to make the journey, to do the journey, to sacrifice and practice. And I can't tell you how important that is. All right, now I get asked quite often what it is that I do when guys, come down here from wherever. And over the last 4 or 5 years, I've had people travel here from all over the world, literally England and, South Korea and all over 4 corners of the North America, Canada and everywhere. And I feel unbelievably privileged that they would come all the way to Texarkana, Texas, or in Arkansas to study their, work on their golf game. I'm under no illusion that we're batting 1,000 either. And I knew that going in. I knew that it was very, very important that if somebody was going to go to all the trouble and expense to come here to learn something, that there wasn't going to be any miracles occur over 2 or 3 days. What I could do is to in effect load them up with information that was reasonably simple and easy to understand, and then they could hopefully accomplish 3 things. 1 is to understand what it is they're trying to do. 2, to understand where they are relative to what it is they're trying to do. And 3, they have a very concise and clear path to get started on their journey. In order to truly learn, to me, there are 3 primary factors that go into this. 1, you've got to understand from a technical standpoint what it is you're trying to do. I try to keep things as untechnical as I can, but at the same time, they need to understand to a degree technically what it is they're trying to do and then why. The second thing is you have to take what they now understand technically and you have to convert it into imagery. They have to be able to see it, and that's why I use footage extensively. They go home with quite a bit of footage that they can relate to, numerous examples of what it is that we do. If you want to call it Slicefixer swing, fine, but they go home with multitudes of examples, and most of it is students of mine, but quite a lot of it would be Hogan or whoever. There's any number of examples. And the third thing is they have to know what it feels like. And that's why I use a lot of different teaching aids, some of which are available on the market, and a lot of them I built myself. I have these epiphanies from every now and then that I can take 2 pieces of PVC and bond them here and cut a hole here and glue this to that, and it's going to be a great teaching aid. And to be perfectly honest with you, 9 out of 10 of them are terrible. They don't work at all. The first time we swing it, it snaps in half, or it just doesn't create the correct feeling or whatever. But every once in a while, about 1 out of 10, probably in 1 out of 10, it's probably 1 out of 20, is actually a very viable teaching aid, because it will instantaneously create the feel of what they both just saw from an imagery standpoint and what they understand technically. And so once they can acclimate a technical thought to an image, and then even better to a feel, then they have an opportunity to go home and create the motion that we're trying to achieve. Whatever it is, whatever aspect of the swing it is, because I think a golf swing breaks down into pivot and arm swing, and that it's not overly complicated if you know what you're trying to accomplish. And so it breaks down into 5 fundamentals, and then you've got the pivot, and then you've got your arm swing. And the pivot can be broken down into takeaway, move away, backswing, transition, downswing, impact zone, release, and the through swing and finish. You could actually break this down into subcategories, and then subcategories of subcategories, and subcategories of subcategories of subcategories if you wanted to. I choose not to do that, because so many times in the golf swing, the certain motion is just a result. In fact, the vast majority of motion in a golf swing is a result of what happened before it, which is totally a result of these fundamentals. But the arm swing is about creating levers and releasing levers, and it's about creating reasonable, fundamentally sound angles and swinging it on the correct plane so that it attacks from the inside and then goes back to the inside. The result would be an impact, a certain degree of clubhead speed, consistently solid contact, which is totally dependent upon correct and consistent impact angles. If you do that, you create compression. And so what I try to do is get guys here and go through this so that they go home loaded up with information. I always look at the image of a Pancho Villa with those bandoleros across his shoulders with all those bullets in his bandoleros. Well, a lot of people show up down here and they've got a lot of information. I mean, they got a lot of ammo. The problem is they got 30-06s, 208s. They got a bunch of information, but they don't have enough ammo of any one caliber to be able to do anything. And I found that a lot with tour players, that they know a little bit about a lot, but they don't know a lot about much of anything. And I see that quite often with really good amateur players, particularly the internet crowd. They know a little bit about a lot, but they just don't have an overall grasp of any one thing. And then occasionally I get a guy down here that really knows next to nothing. But honestly, with the internet crowd, I rarely see that. You know, if somebody's going to go to the expense to travel all the way to here, they have some knowledge. They can read whatever it is that I wrote on the internet, and they can grasp that it makes sense to them. And then I just clarify a lot of things while they're here and really clear them up and get them going on a path that if they'll sustain that path for a number of years, you're going to look up and you're going to see a golf swing that is completely unrecognizable from the one they showed up with, and it will contain all of the impact characteristics that I talked about earlier. But in essence, this is, that's a golf swing right there. Now, obviously, that's only half of one page of the screen, so that's pretty simple. But there's any number of ways to mix all these things up and come out with Colin Montgomery swing, or set up, change these, and then you pivot, you change the setups, set up these fundamentals, these components of the setup, and you're going to end up with a totally different pivot as a result of that, which then the arms are going to react and do certain things, and then you have to do certain things in the transition to get the arms and the club in a reasonable position so that you can achieve the correct downswing angles. So that you can get the club in a position so that it will attack according to the correct criteria, which, most don't. But the factors, as I said earlier, it's the angle of attack, the club head path, the face angle, that low point of that arc, and club head speed. And I believe you can alter all four of those through your setup and not through the swing motion or swing motion alteration or change. Meaning, if I'm going to teach somebody how to hit it high, I'm not going to have them backing up their head trying to increase their core tilt so that they can attack it with more effective loft to hit it higher. They're simply going to set up to do it. Same thing for a draw, same thing for a fade, same thing for a high draw or a high fade. It's all going to be done through the setup because, as I've often quoted, I say these things so many times during the course of a day that a lot of my kids just laugh because I say these things, but one of them is it's hard enough to learn one swing. You're going to learn a fade swing, a draw swing, a high ball swing, a low ball swing, a knockdown, three-finger, etc., and then multiply it times 13 field clubs. Good luck. And I've gotten in debates on GolfWorks, in particular with one teacher one time, and he was saying that you had to have an inside-out CF release to hit it high and hook it, and you had to have a more rounded, leftish, lowish CP release, centripetal release, to hit it low or fade it. And I just basically said, well, maybe your guys do, but mine don't. Mine can change their ball flight dramatically by simply making simple setup adjustments, because it is so important to understand that, to me, hitting golf shots is like it's like programming an autopilot on an airplane. I'm a budding pilot. I've been flying all my life, and if I want to set my autopilot up, I set it up for I want to go to 10,000 feet. Well, I dial in 10,000 feet and lock it. If I want to go at 500 feet a minute, I lock it at 500 feet and program it in. If I want to go on a heading of 354 degrees north-northwest, well, I'm going to dial it in and lock it in. And so once you rotate the airplane off the end of the runway, if you wanted to, you could just push the autopilot and it would fly you at 500 feet a minute to 10,000 feet on a heading of 354 degrees north-northwest. Well, in golf, if I want to start it at the bunker on the right, I dial that in with my setup. If I want it to draw off that bunker, then I'm going to set that into my setup. And if I want to hit it high, I'm going to set that in my setup. And then I'm going to swing the golf club. I'm going to activate the autopilot and swing. And that is something that you would see very predominant in mine. The guys that have been here and stayed for a few days are shocked sometimes how well some of these kids can hit a golf ball and how they can move it left and right and high and low and so forth and so on. And the swing doesn't appear to change, meaning they're not finishing high to hit it high. They're not finishing low to hit it low. They're not trying to rotate the toe from overly inside to make it hook, or trying to hang on and drag the heel through to make it cut. They're simply setting it all up and using the same motion, the same pivot, the same synchronization of their arms to that pivot, the same release, and they're getting dramatically different results. And to me, that is much, much easier way to learn how to work a golf ball and play golf. But it's, of course, all dependent upon getting set up right and building the initial swing correctly. And that's why I'm such a proponent of little 9-to-3 golf swings. because I determined pretty early on that if I couldn't hit, a sand wedge, in my case an L wedge, if I couldn't take an L wedge and hit the ball correctly and get a consistent divot pattern hitting an L wedge, then why was I making full swings? So it was very unrealistic to expect to walk out there and make that swing if I couldn't make this swing. Yet all of the same components of this great golf swing right here are all in this little one. I mean, Matt's not gripping it different. He's not setting up any different. His angles are the same. His grip's the same. He's going to start the club the same in one piece with his pivot in both swings. He's going to set the club the same way. He's going to transition the same way. He's going to create leverage the same way. He's going to carry that leverage down through the shot the same way, and the club's going to release the same way. And so the bottom line is if you can't do this, fellas, how in the world do you ever expect to do this? But the average amateur is not willing to go out there and work very anally and in a disciplined manner to get their hands on their right, to get set up on the right angles, much less to start it right, pivot, and allow this sequence of motion to ingrain itself in these little swings. But if they were willing to do it, you'd look up in a year or so and they'd be able to do this to a degree. But my main point is that if you can't do this, then why in the world would you ever expect you could do this, much less this, and you don't have a prayer in Hades of ever doing this. But I'll assure you that if you'll hit a bunch of these, that you will learn how to stretch it a little, and next thing you know, you're doing that, and then the next thing you know, you're doing this, and then a year or two later, you're able to stand up there with a driver and pop it. And the reason I know this is because it doesn't matter. I've already talked about the impact angles, but there's Matthew with the shaft leaning, and it's a great move. And he's passing through, and you can see the angles he's on when he strikes the ball. Well, here he is hitting, which is basically a little long 9-3, and I want you to look at the angles he's on. Look at his arms. Look at the shaft. Look at his positioning of his weight into his left side. How he's unwinding around his left leg in both swings. One's a full swing and one's just a little knockdowny wedge shot. But the point is the same basic components are in both swings. And if you can't do the one on the right, well, how in the world do you ever expect to do the one on the left? And that's the thing that I try to beat through you guys' heads, that you have to be willing to do this. If you're not willing to do that, there's really no prayer that you're ever going to be able to do that. And this goes for every method. I don't care what it is, stack and tilt, or Ballard, or Ernest Jones swing the club head, or Dick Altman square to square, or gosh, there's a million different swing methods I've studied. But all of them are going to have, like I said, a particular setup criteria, grip, and a particular sequence of motion. And if you can't ingrain it in the little swing, I don't know why you would ever think you could go get a longer club and make a bigger swing and it's going to correct itself. You know, that's like saying you can't drive a golf cart across the parking lot at your local golf course, but give me the keys to that Ferrari, I'm going to go get on the interstate. It's not going to work. You know, you can't play chopsticks or scales on a piano, but I want to play a concerto at Carnegie Hall. You know, give me that Chopin. Forget the scales. It's not going to work. You must go through the process, and you're going to earn the right to be a golfer. And if you're prepared to do that, then you have an opportunity to be really good at it. And the thing that I found is whether guys knew they were doing 9-3s as a drill or whether they were just did it, all good players that I've ever observed all hit a lot of little half wedge shots. Whether they knew they were actually trying to accomplish something per a drill, or whether they're just doing it because it helps them to warm up and kind of get their swing in sequence and all working together. They all do it. Now, you know, when we do 9-3s, you know, we're trying to go from a 9 o'clock left arm or right arm in this instance left arm because he's right-handed. We're trying to go from 9 to right arm level, which is 3. So that would be basically 3, and this would be 9. So that would be 9 o'clock, and then there's 3 o'clock. But we're not trying to recock the club. But if you're a guy that's a lot handsier method, then you're going to go from what was commonly called when I was a kid L to L. So when you're right here, the shaft would be basically a mirror image of where it was in the backswing. But this type of release that results in the club recocking like that involve stalling the pivot and utilizing the hands and arms in order to get the club to recock that fast, because ordinarily it wouldn't do it. Just like a baseball pitcher has his right arm, if they're throwing it right-handed, the levers of the right arm and right wrist are set, and then as they stride and rotate their body, their arm extends. And so in essence, this will be like a baseball pitcher. It's set, and then right here it's extended. So if you can picture a baseball pitcher, really any sport I studied, if they were hitting it or throwing it, they went from a leveraged position to affect the downswing to an extremely extended position, meaning the arm didn't recock on the through swing immediately in a baseball pitcher's move or a batter, especially a great hitter. Same thing in tennis to a degree. I didn't see the right arm unloading and the tennis racket being overly manipulated with the arms. I used to like to watch Andre Agassi's return to serve because it was so tight and compact and powerful, and it was very core-oriented. And that's why he had such a short move, such a compact move that you couldn't hit a serve by him. And plus he was cat quick. The same thing with Barry Bonds hitting a baseball. He didn't have a tremendously long stride. So his arms and the bat got in the strike zone in a nanoflash, and you couldn't throw a 100-mile-an-hour fastball by him. Well, that's what I like, is compact and efficient, and I don't like a lot of excess motion because it's not necessary. And to me, if you're going to the range to work on your golf swing and the end result of your journey is not going to be a simpler golf swing with fewer moving parts, then my question to you is, why are you working on your golf swing? If the end result is going to be a move that is more complicated with more moving parts, then I would turn around and go find another roadmap, because it's hard enough to learn a simpleton little correct, fundamentally sound setup. It's hard enough to learn a simple little consistent pivot. It's hard enough to get your arms in the correct position at the top so that they're properly acclimated to your core and the shaft is on a reasonably shallow plane with the face square or pretty square to the plane. And so, if you're going to go add a bunch of movements to it, it's going to be more complicated and more difficult to ingrain and own. So the reason that we do a lot of these 9-to-3s and the reason I so heavily recommend it is because the bottom line is, whatever method you're using, if you can't perform it correctly in a 9-to-3 swing, I don't know why you think you could get a longer club and make a bigger swing and fix anything. Okay, in closing, I'm going to talk, like I said, about what I do when guys come down here, and then what it takes to develop a great golf game. And all of these things, these elements that I've written here on the screen, are basically the package of what it takes if you're going to be a really, really good player. And obviously the golf swing's a big part of it. And as we talked about earlier, you've got to understand the technical aspects of what it is you're trying to do. So you've got to understand that. You've got to know what it looks like. That's what footage helped me enormously. And then you've got to know from a kinesthetic or feel, what it feels like to do it. And I believe very strongly in different teaching aids. I remember the first time I ever heard about Ben Doyle using sawed-off mops with Bobby Clampett, and obviously all the great teaching aids and imagery that Harvey Pinnock used. And those all influenced me because I think Ben Doyle's a fine teacher, probably the best TGM guy in the business. I think Mr. Pinnock was an absolute genius. So many of the things that he said in the little red book and even in the green one they're just invaluable advice. And those are books that every person that thinks they're going to teach needs to read. Every player probably should read them. But that kind of takes care of the golf swing. And then, and there's always a drill that can, I have drills that for everything, to ingrain the feel of the takeaway, the feeling of the left forearm, lead forearm rotating and setting the levers and getting the shaft on a reasonable plane and getting the face squared up, opened up and squared up. There's a wide variety of drills for transition or the pivot in general. I use chairs, I use sticks, I use all kinds of things. There's any number of little teaching aids and things that I've come up with that help you to feel. They won't allow you to flip it, for instance. And there's a bunch of different things, and they'll all be in the book that Rob and I are writing. But everything, every section, every piece of the golf swing has a wide variety of drills or teaching aids that will instantaneously give you the feeling to correlate back to the visual and the technical. But if you do that, that takes care of the golf swing. Then your short game absolutely must match your long game. For instance, if you're going to go work on a pivot core-based golf swing where the hands and the arms are reacting at all times, and the toe of the club is reacting, you're not manipulating the toe of the club with your hands and arms, then you absolutely must have a short game that matches your golf swing. In other words, if you're going to go work on a core-oriented golf swing for 3 or 4 hours over on the practice tee, and then you're going to go over the chipping green and put on a Phil Mickelson exhibition, chipping and pitching, where you're manipulating the face with your hands, and you're just going to undo all the practice you just did on your long game. I see this often when there's several players that, I've seen them to go, their golf swings were pretty good and they had the release down, and then they're going to go work with the short game gurus, and I know the short game gurus stuff, and it involves a lot of manipulation with the arms and hands to create certain angles of the blade to create a certain type of shot, whether you're trying to use the leading edge to trap it or the trailing edge to slide the blade under it to hit something soft. You could hit all of those shots and use basically your normal golf swing. And when you do that, then your golf swing and your short game techniques, they match up. And so if you go spend 4 or 5 hours chipping and pitching, you're actually going to be improving your golf swing. And so that's something that's vital to understand. And if you have a handsy type golf swing, by all means work on a handsy type short game techniques. But if you're going to work on a big muscle golf swing, you better have a big muscle based short game. So we cover all that in depth. And then we get into course management and lessons that I learned both the hard way and through others. And I can't even tell you the invaluable things I was taught by Bill Rogers, and particularly Blaine McAllister. And Blaine McAllister taught me a tremendous amount. After caddying for him, when I was still in college, Blaine called me and asked me to come caddy for him at the Nelson and Colonial in Memphis. And I didn't want to do it. I wanted to bang around in these summer amateur tournaments. And Blaine's exact words were, "Geoff, you're going to learn a lot more from me out here caddying on the tour than you ever will in those amateur tournaments." And he was 100% right. At the time, I just thought he wanted a free caddy, but the truth of the matter is he was trying to educate me on how to play golf. And my game, by that point in time, had disintegrated so badly that I really needed to understand how to manage my game because, honestly, I didn't have a whole lot to play with, and I had to learn how to think and play within myself. And to me, course management comes back to the Clint Eastwood line in Dirty Harry where he says a man just has to understand his limitations or know his limitations. And that's course management. You have to know what you're capable of and what you're not capable of and play within your ability and match your game up to each individual hole and to each golf course. And and once you do that, then you have to understand how to think your way around the golf course and make percentage decisions. I'm a big believer in picking very conservative targets, very conservative shots, and making very aggressive swings. You're going to pick a conservative target, a conservative shot that you know that you can pull off the vast majority of the time, but you're going to be a very aggressive in the application. You're not going to make a very aggressive determination on both the shot and the target and then wimp out about halfway down and block it out in the right stuff or pull it over in the left stuff because you're guarding against hitting it in the lake or out of bounds. Much better to make very conservative, smart choices and then make aggressive swings. Now, there's a time to make aggressive swings. When, if you're 2 shots back with 2 holes to go and you've got a tight pin on a par 5, but you can reach it, then you may want to be a little more aggressive and go at that pin because you're trying to win the tournament and you need an eagle. But it goes back to Mr. Hogan, the one year when he won the Masters, and he was in position to hit it on both 13 and 15 easily in 2, and he didn't do it. And the reporters asked him about it, and he said, well, I didn't need an eagle. That's why he laid up and hit wedges. And he birdied both of them anyway, hitting wedges. So that's a great example of course management. Another great example is Mr. Hogan on number 11 at Augusta. He said if you ever saw him on the green on 11 that he'd hit a bad shot because he was always aiming for the extreme right edge of the green. Because back in those days, you were hitting 4 woods and 3 irons into that little old green. And he understood that if he, over the course of 4 rounds, if he could put it somewhere over on the right side of the green, he's probably going to play the hole 1 over for 4 rounds. And he knew the field was probably going to play it 3 over. And so over the course of the marathon of 72 holes, if he was able to play that hole around 1 over, even par, he's going to pick up a lot of shots on the field. And that's a tremendous example of understanding how to manage your game. So we go over all of that. And of course, it's a big difference between how a 20 handicapper needs to manage his game and a scratch player. But many, many times, just with these 2 right here, no matter what happens with this, if they just get these two right, they cut their handicap by 5 shots or better, just because they learn how to pitch and chip and putt better, and they learn how to manage their game. And we cover a little bit of everything. When we get into putting, we talk about how I don't believe that there's an arc stroke and a square-to-square stroke. Those strokes are created by the setup. I believe there's 4 types of strokes. There's wrist, there's arms and shoulders, and there's all shoulders. And if you set up a certain way with a certain length of putter, it's going to tend to create more of a square-to-square stroke or more of an arc stroke, or an inside to down the line, kind of an arc to down the line like Mr. Stockton likes. But at any rate, we cover all of these things. And then we get into sports psychology. I studied under Chuck Hogan. I thought Chuck was brilliant, and he taught me a tremendous amount about emotional control and anxiety, conquering anxiety, because anxiety is what kills all our golf games. And he taught us just an unbelievable amount about how to do these things, and it made 100% sense. And, of course, most of you guys probably have read the book, Bob Rotel's book, Golf's Not a Game of Perfect, and Pia Nielsen's book, whatever it is, 54, I can't even remember right now. I'm drawing a blank, but forgive me, I've got an ADD old brain. But the point is that you can read those books, and they're excellent. But I studied under Chuck, and he taught me a bunch of things that really helped. I was also very close friends with a guy named Bill Scanlon at one time, and Bill was a top 6 or 8 in the tennis world at one time. And Bill taught me some tremendous things about how he improved his tennis game strictly through his brain and changing the way that he operated because he was a really solid 20th in the world, and all of a sudden he jumped into the top 10, and he did it all with his brain. He didn't do it through techniques or his physical technique. He didn't improve his forehand or his backhand or his serve. He did it with his brain. And Bill was a very close friend of mine at one time and really helped me enormously to learn how to use my brain better. And so we go through all of that stuff. And then the last thing we cover quite extensively is how to practice. And once again, these are things that Chuck Hogan taught me directly, and I observed from watching Blaine and Blaine McAllister and Bill Rogers practice, and how the common denominators between those two particularly. You have to know how to practice. You have to know how to implement all the things and ingrain all the things that you're working on. And that's the process. And this is a buzzword you'll hear a lot with all the sports psychologists, but it's true. I mean, every team in Major League Baseball wants to win the World Series, but there's a process to getting there. And there's going to be a lot of ups and downs in that process. And so it's the exact same thing in golf. So we cover all of that. And so basically what I try to do is give everybody an overview of the whole package, the whole deal. And it gives them an opportunity to go home and start improving all of these aspects of their total, complete golf game package. And I try to do it in a manner that's understandable and relatively simple and allows people to go home with a concrete understanding of what it is they're trying to do. And I'm really shocked that I've been doing this for about 5 years, and that I know of, I haven't gotten a really negative review on the internet. And with the anonymity of the internet, anybody could, say whatever they want. That's one of the things I don't like about the internet, is there's, it's tough to defend yourself against accusations. It's tough enough to do it in a court of law or face-to-face, but it's really tough with the anonymity of the internet. And I'm shocked that I haven't gotten any truly negative reviews. I think the reason is, and I'm also not foolish enough to think that everybody's come down here has gone home and done exactly what I've told them they ought to do. I'm sure the majority have probably gone home and gone back to the typical deal where they're, searching for the perfect magic golf swing. But I do believe that the reason that I've avoided negative is because I think anyone that comes down here understands and can feel the passion I have for trying to help them with their game and trying to give them some advice based on 27 years of experience of teaching and 47 years, hard to admit, of experience in golf. And being fortunate enough to be around and kind of in the inner circle with 3 world-class players, Miller Barber and Bill Rogers and Blaine McAllister. And I know the common denominators between those 3. I also know the shortcomings in my own golf journey, the things that really, really hurt me in my own game, the development of my own game. And they were primarily 2 things, immaturity and bad swing advice. I think I could have overcome the immaturity with time, but I could not overcome the bad swing advice, or at least it took an awful long time to do it. It took the better part of 10 years to overcome the bad swing advice, and those 10 years should have been 10 years where I was maturing as a person, and rather than worrying about my golf swing, I would have been improving my golf swing while at the same time really learning how to play the game. And I try to set it up so that you guys can avoid making the same mistakes, particularly with kids. Our book that Rob and I are writing, as it stands now, I mean, half of it is the golf swing, and it's basically, honestly, I don't know why. I never thought anybody would really care what I have to say about a golf swing, but evidently there's quite a few people that do. And so here it is. You know, here is the details and all the things that I didn't talk about on GolfWorks, or I have 2 or 3 proteges out there that are essentially teaching what it is that I believe, because I've mentored them for several years. But even they don't know all the little intricacies. There's several little things that I just don't talk about unless a person's very trusted and they're a very good player. But it'll all be in the book. But essentially, it's going to state that there's a lot of different ways to swing a golf club that'll work. And there's 4 basic pivot styles. There's 2 basic release styles. And I'll touch on those lightly. And then we'll get into whatever the Slicefixer swing is, whatever you want to call it. Here it is. If you want to know how these swings were created, here's how they're created. But the most important part of this book is not the swing stuff to me. It's all the little minutiae that I learned in regards to things that didn't have anything to do with the golf swing, and life lessons that I learned through my own journey through golf and life, because that my whole life has been golf, and so they parallel one another, and there's so many things I've learned that I really want to, it'll help adults, but it should really help kids to understand that, number one, not everybody's going to like you. It's just the way it is. And like my father was our district attorney and then a state judge for 26 years, I think. And he told me a long time ago that, in the political arena that, no matter who you are, 30% of the people are going to vote against you because they don't like the color of your hair or how you spell your name. And it's just the way it is. And in any business or in golf or whatever it is, the better you get, the more success you have, the bigger the target you are. And so you have to be prepared for criticism. And you also, when you're developing your game, when you're in school and you tell people that, you want to be a professional golfer, most of them are going to roll their eyes and tell you you'll never make it. And you have to have the ability to understand their opinion doesn't matter. I do one thing with all my kids. I hold up 6 fingers and I ask them, how many is this? And they'll say that's 6. And I'll say, well, there's approximately 6.6 billion people on this earth. I'll hold up those same 6 fingers and I'll ask them, how many fingers is this again? And they'll say 6. And I'll say, well, if you got this many, meaning 6, that love you and respect you, whether you shot 63 or 90, you're lucky. Because most of us are very fortunate if we have half a dozen true friends and people that genuinely care about you. And they may not be members of your immediate family, but very few people even have 6. Most people have a bunch of acquaintances or a few acquaintances, but they really don't have very many people that really love them and support them and want them genuinely to be successful. And these are things that kids need to know. And there's a million other, and I have a lot of stories that a lot of them are funny, and some of them weren't funny when they occurred, but they're funny now. And there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from this, and because I know that my time on earth is starting to crawl to an end, and hopefully this book will allow people to learn from my experiences, and it'll be a great legacy for me, on down the line. If some kid reads it and it affects his life in a positive way or her life in a positive way, and they don't have to go through some of the things that I've had to go through, or if they do go through them, they'll be able to handle it better than I did, and they'll understand that this is just the way the human race is, and this is the way things are. People are inherently jealous and envious, and so the more successful you are, the more things you're going to have to deal with that may not be pleasant. But as long as it's just life, it's just the way it is, the easier it is you can handle it. Because I'm a big believer that you need to spend most of your time managing your own business, and what's left over staying out of everybody else's. And if you do that, you have a much greater chance of being successful, not only in golf but in life. In closing, once again, I really want to thank Ralph and the Gotham Golf Blog for inviting me to do this, and I hope that something I've said is going to be of help to you guys, and you'll benefit from it. And you're also all welcome at any time to come see me wherever I am. And I hope that hopefully one of these days we'll get to shake hands and visit and get to know one another. But in closing, thank you very much, and thank you again, Ralph, and I look forward to speaking with you guys at some time in the future.